Okay, historians, welcome to Unit 7, topic 7.7, Conducting World War II. This is today's class activity. Let's get to it. Our learning objective today, focus is on government, okay? And the objective is explain similarities and differences in how governments used a variety of methods to conduct war. More specifically, let's zoom into the historical developments. We're talking about components of total war during World War II, in which governments used a variety of strategies, including we have political propaganda, we have art, media, and intensified forms of nationalism, otherwise known as hypernationalism, to mobilize their populations. That was the goal. All right. We're also talking about new military technology that reflects firebombing, as well as the atomic bomb that was used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan to end the war in the Pacific. All right, let's move. We're going to explain how governments mobilized to support World War II through total war and ideologies. So how did governments mobilize their citizens? The skill is we're going to practice using evidence to support a claim. First, let's talk about mobilizing the civilian population for total war during World War II. And we have total war, mobilizing civilian population and domestic economy to support the war effort. Okay, that's total war for mobilizing civilians within a given country. So in the US and Canada, they mobilize civilian population pretty well, especially women in the factories. Okay, so industrial output increased partly due to the lack of risk of attacks, unlike in Europe and Japan. So you have propaganda posters like Rosie the Riveter and the message throughout American communities that women have to take on the role of men inside these factories to create weapons and vehicles and materials that are going to be utilized in the war. Okay, Germany was not as productive as US and Canada. They utilized forced labor, mostly prisoners of war, and also Jewish people in the concentration camps, okay? And Japan did not mobilize women to work in the war to maintain traditional gender roles. Those were solidified and static within Japan. It was very, very important to them. So, hypernationalism in Nazi Germany, mobilizing that support for World War II. So you do have totalitarian Nazi Germany, and you can see in the image the swastikas that reflect National Socialism. You can see the reflection of people's reactions, the tone of the photo, people saluting Hitler, huge crowds, and Nazi Germany mobilized support through very public displays of hyper-nationalistic and militaristic fascism. Okay, this is one-party leadership. The state is above the individual, total absolute power, total submission of the individual required. And when you have that, you move as one unit, okay? Germany earlier in the war, they were able to conquer surrounding territories quickly through their blitzkrieg lightning war strategy. They were able to use military technology to create fast-moving tanks. They used jeeps packed with soldiers, and they would start in the countryside and slash and burn all the crops and farms, destroy the homes. A total blitzkrieg lightning war strategy. It was very difficult for an opposing side to mobilize a military to fight back at the brisk pace in which the Nazis mobilized their soldiers and moved in this lightning war strategy. All right, claims and evidence and sources. We're going to explain how a claim or evidence supports or modifies or refutes a source's argument. So here we go. Claim and evidence in a source. So we're going to read the question first. This is a multiple choice. Based on the passage above, it can be inferred that Mazur might also support which of the following assertions. So we have to find his claim. Mark Mazur, a British historian, possibly coming from the British perspective, Eurocentric perspective. He wrote Dark Continent, Europe's 20th century in the year 2000. We have to find his argument and then match it up with another possible argument below. By the 1930s, many Europeans were ready to leave behind the liberal democratic order created after 1918 by Britain, France, and the United States for a more authoritarian future, total control, totalitarian. What they did not bargain for was the brutal reality of the Nazi imperialism and the denial of all national aspirations apart from German ones. Okay? No experience was more crucial to the development of Europe in the 20th century. As both Hitler and Stalin were well aware, the Second World War involved something far more profound than a series of military engagements and diplomatic negotiations. Well, what was it really about then? It was a struggle for the social and political future of the continent itself. And such was the shock of being subjected to a regime of unprecedented and unremitting violence that in the space of 8 years, a sea change took place in Europeans' political and social attitudes, and they rediscovered the virtues of democracy. In other words, you have colonialism, and colonialism really 15th and 16th century colonialism turned into imperialism, and imperialism turned into direct and indirect forms of imperialism, and those competitions and tensions lead to resentments, and that leads to stronger forms of imperialism, hyper-nationalism, militarism, the resentment, and this leads to these forms of totalitarian regimes where at the result so many people died. A lot of regret occurs post-World War II, where people realize they want to return to the virtues of democracy. And then you see the birth of the United Nations, right? So Hitler's war, second paragraph, aimed at the complete racial reconstitution of Europe. You know, the Holocaust, right? There were no historical parallels for such a project. This was the first time in human history people tried to systematically eradicate a race of people during the Holocaust. In Europe, neither Napoleon nor the Habsburgs had aimed at gaining such an exclusive dominion. In its violence and racism, Nazi imperialism drew more from European precedents in Asia, Africa, and especially in the Americas, with the wiping out of so many Native Americans, right? When we eat wheat from Canada, remarked Hitler one evening during the war, we don't think about the despoiled Indians. On another occasion, he described the Ukraine as Germany's new Indian empire. But if Europeans would have resented being ruled as the British ruled India, they were shocked at being submitted to an experience closer to that inflicted upon the native populations of the Americas. All right, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to try to realize, what is Mark Mazur's claim here? What is his argument? Okay, if you still haven't found it, you can pause the video until you find it, then you unpause, okay? Let's move down to some of the choices. It can be inferred that Mazur might also support which of the following assertions. The assertion has to match his assertion in the paragraphs above. The industrial capacity of the United States doomed Hitler's project for Nazi-dominated Europe to failure from the start. Or B, the Nazis' rigidly ideological approach to empire building prevented them from consolidating their control of continental Europe. C, ordinary Germans' revulsion at the genocidal policies of the Nazi Party as the Second World War progressed would have resulted in a revolution in Germany even if Hitler had won the military conflict. Or D, Stalin's modernization policies would have enabled the Soviet Union to defeat Nazi Germany regardless of Hitler's policies. All right, if you still haven't found the claim from above, you can pause this video and you unpause it when you're ready. Okay, let's move on and take a look at the answer. And the answer is B, the Nazis' rigidly ideological approach to empire building actually prevented them from consolidating their control over continental Europe. Okay? Let's move on. Summing it up, what do you need to remember from this section? World War II was a total war. Governments used intensified forms of nationalism, they call it hypernationalism, to mobilize populations of people for the purpose of waging war, all to participate. Governments use ideologies, fascism and communism, to mobilize all of their states' resources for war. And in the case of totalitarian states, to repress basic freedoms and dominate many aspects of daily life during the course of the conflicts and beyond. Governments also use military strategies like Nazi Germany's use of blitzkrieg to conquer territory quickly. Okay? Let's move on to Section 2. Section 2, we're going to explain how governments use propaganda specifically to mobilize support for World War II. We're also going to practice using evidence to support a claim. So we would have to identify the claim and then support it with evidence. Okay, first we need to identify and define what propaganda is. The definition of propaganda can be seen as information, usually biased or untrue, used to influence people's attitudes. The purpose is to discredit the enemy and garner public support for a national cause. Often uses emotion, fear, patriotism to manipulate the audience. Audience is very important, purpose is very important, point of view, very important. The goals of propaganda is to get people to act a certain way, fear another group, give money, support a cause. Let's take a look. For each propaganda poster, you're going to identify the claim or the message in the poster, and then you're going to list the evidence in the poster that supports the message or the claim. You're going to take about 3 minutes to do this for each propaganda poster. First propaganda poster you see here. See the title, see the source, the claim and the evidence. Take 3 minutes, type your answers right here, and then we'll move on to the exemplar with the explanation. Pause the video, unpause when you're ready. Okay, let's take a look. We have a poster. The claim here, if Germany wins World War II, Europe will be free. So we can see this is in German. This is a German propaganda poster. That's the message here. So you have a red dragon, and the red dragon is being defeated. Okay, and the poster depicts with lightning from the German soldier. Okay, you can see the German helmet, denotes German soldier. Poster depicts a German soldier using 2 lightning bolts to slay a red dragon. And your red dragon is symbolizing Russian communism that was about to spread or attack the German farm worker in the bottom left corner. So if you're a member of the German rural population and you're a farmer in a small town, you would see the poster and you would be influenced to believe a dragon or a sense of evil is going to overcome my small town. The German soldier is going to set me free. So if we win the war, we will be set free. All right? So now you understand how to find the message here and support it with the items inside the propaganda poster to support your claim. Let's try another. Propaganda poster 2. Pause the video, analyze it, claim, and fill out the evidence. It all goes in the boxes below. Unpause it when you're ready, and we'll take a look at the exemplar with the explanation. Okay, let's take a look at this poster. United, we are strong. The Allied powers are stronger when united together. United, we will win. And you can see the Allied powers. You can see Great Britain. You can see the United States of America. You can see the Soviet Union here, among other flags from nations that were part of the Allied powers. So now, what are the items inside this poster that support? Well, we see when the cannons are firing together, they're more powerful. This united power will lead to victory. And it's all the cannons fighting together. Okay? pushing that power into one direction. Let's take a look at another. Here's our propaganda poster. Claim and evidence. You know where it goes. Pause the video, unpause when you're ready for the exemplar and explanation. Here we go, the claim. What can we find here? Help Russian war relief, okay? The hopes of the civilization rest on the worthy banners of the courageous Russian army. General Douglas MacArthur. If you know your history from your notes, you know that's an American general. They're speaking positively about the Russians, help Russian war relief. So what's the message here? Well, the claim or the message is that American citizens should give money to help Russians win World War II. Now, what's the evidence? Well, American General MacArthur says that the hopes of civilization, winning World War II, rest within the Russian army. So the hopes for civilization, he's speaking on behalf of Western democracy, American civilization, Western European civilization. The importance of that civilization rests in supporting the Russians to defeat the Germans on the Eastern Front. Okay? Our final propaganda poster, you can see here in German. Claim and supporting evidence, go to the boxes below. Take 3 minutes, pause this video now, unpause when you're ready for the exemplar and the explanation. Okay, let's take a look. There, Jude, somebody seems to be pulling a curtain behind a very dark, foreboding image of an individual who's a caricature of a human being, and all these fists are being pointed toward him. His head seems to be hovering over black smoke in the darkness behind a curtain. Very dark, very foreboding, very negative-based image here. And what is the claim? Well, this actually is an anti-Semitic claim that blames the Jewish people for starting World War II and perpetuating it. Okay? This is from the Nazi ideology perspective. All right, now what is the evidence in here that supports that? We see fists raised in anger, possibly demanding war. And behind the curtain is an offensive stereotype of a Jewish man at the source of this anger. Many of these propaganda posters were utilized in Nazi Germany to mobilize support for the Nazi Party and blame all of Germany's problems pre-war and during the war on Jewish people. They were used as a scapegoat and as one of the ways to identify and dehumanize Jewish people, which led to the Holocaust. All right, let's look at some multiple choice practice now. Let's take a look at this multiple choice question. Look at the image on the left. Read the question. I'll give you about 60 seconds. Pause the video. Unpause when you feel like you have the right answer. Ready? Go. All right, hopefully you have the answer and you've unpaused the video. So we take a look at this image here, and what do we see? This is an image of Stalin, okay? It's an image of Stalin, and you have an image of Lenin on the left, and they're both pointing towards the Russian Soviet Union flag. Underneath that flag, you see an image that reflects industry. And you have factories, and you have machines and businesses, and they're both looking, those leaders are looking in that direction. And you have crowds of soldiers looking in that direction. Society beneath them at the bottom of the image moving in that direction. So it reflects a support for industrialization here. So the posters from 17th century Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union raise the flag of Lenin. It gives us victory. And the banners at the bottom, long live the invincible party of Lenin, long live the great guide of the international proletarian revolution, Comrade Stalin. We're going to move society toward industrialization. So artwork of this type shown in the image were used for all of the following, except, so we have to pull out the one that it's not used for. Mobilize the support of the population in support of the policy of total war during the Second World War. Showcase Soviet support for the Warsaw Pact during the Cold War. You have to understand what the Warsaw Pact is. Promote Soviet support for anti-imperialist independence movements in Asia and Africa. You have to understand those anti-imperialist independent movements. Or encourage Soviet citizens to embrace Western popular culture. Let's take a look. Artworks of this type shown in the image were used for all of the following except to D. Encourage Soviet citizens to embrace Western popular culture. What they wanted to do was encourage Soviet citizens to embrace Western industrialization, Western industry as power, not the popular culture of free market trade and consumerism. They did not want people to become materialistic through the competition of creating businesses and selling products at lower prices, so people in Western civilizations like America and Western Europe would buy more and use those material items as a definition or identity of self. So the Soviets did not want that to be part of the communistic ideology. So when they say encourage Soviet citizens to embrace Western popular culture, that is not what they wanted to do with this poster. They wanted them to embrace industrialization, working in a factory, building machinery that reflects the Soviet Union's strength and power of industry. What's important to remember here? Once again, World War II was a total war, and governments used a variety of strategies, including political propaganda and art and media, and intensified their forms of nationalism, once again hyper-nationalism, to mobilize populations, both in the home countries and in their colonies, or former colonies, for the purpose of waging war. So the governments used ideologies that you know already, fascism, communism, to mobilize all of their states' resources, and totalitarian states to repress basic freedoms and dominate the aspects of daily life during the course of the conflicts in order to maintain total control to make sure everybody participated in the outcome of the war. Let's move on to section 3. And we're going to identify and explain quickly how military technology was used during World War II. New military technology. We're also going to practice using evidence to support and refute historical claims. Let's take a look. World War II, new technology. So USA joined World War II after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Japan wanted to fortify their political position of new imperial power, and they knew invading China and many other countries in Southeast Asia would cause the United States to get involved in the war because the United States had that economic influence over there. So Japan wanted to bomb Pearl Harbor as a preemptive attack to destroy military ships so Japan could complete their invasion of the mainland of China and many of the foreign lands, and they knew it would delay the time in which the United States would be able to rebuild ships and go after them. So during this time period, new technology was created and utilized that led to mass murder and destruction in order to win World War II. Let's be more specific. Firebombing. Firebombing was a new incendiary technology that caused destruction through fire instead of a blast from a bomb. Firebombing was used in the bombings of Tokyo, Japan, and Dresden, Germany. People, I'm talking total destruction of cities, where the bomb would explode and then light the rubble or remaining structure on fire, which would turn to ash. And you can see, if you do some research of the results of firebombing in Tokyo, in Japan, and Dresden, Germany, you can see visual images of total annihilation of major cities and farmland in the rural areas. The atomic bomb. Italy was defeated in 1943 and Germany was defeated in 1945. But Japan refused to surrender even though there was no chance of victory. Japan's totalitarian use of the idea of militarism. At this point, they militarized every member of society. They were training children and young individuals to be used as human bombs as the United States contemplating invading Japan. And the United States had to estimate casualties if we were to invade mainland Japan. The American military casualties were estimated to be in the millions. So President Truman decided to utilize a new atomic bomb that was created under the Manhattan Project. His rationale for using this weapon of mass destruction was to end World War II quickly and prevent further American deaths and a prolonged war with Japan. The Manhattan Project was a project that was run by a man named Oppenheimer, a secret project to try to create pressure to identify a singular atom, create pressure, crack open that atom. And what they found was the intensity of the explosion that occurred when you were to crack open one atom is well over 1 million tons of dynamite. And they wanted to use this power to scare Japan into surrendering. Okay? On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb was dropped in the city of Hiroshima, killing more than 100,000 civilians instantly, vaporizing them into dust. Japan did not surrender. Okay? Hiroshima had more than 500,000 people die from the atomic bomb. The ground zero, you're vaporized into dust. And for miles away from that, the explosion sent people flying into millions of pounds of rubble in the destruction of the buildings. And on August 9th, 1945, another bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, which killed more than 50,000 civilians instantly. Japan surrendered after, after the bombing of Nagasaki, effectively ending World War II. The long-term implications from the radiation of the bomb, the flash of light in the sky, sent radiation through concrete, through wood, through metal, through the bodies of human beings, causing mutations in their cells that would turn into, for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people over time, the development of cancer and birth defects in children. These two events are the only times in history atomic bombs have been used in war. Okay, claims and evidence in a source. We're going to create a short answer. So let's use the passage below to answer all parts of the question that follows. Well, what do we have to do? Let's read the question first. Identify one historical example of mass violence that was committed by a totalitarian state in the 20th century that would support Rummel's argument in the passage. All right, find the argument and then think of another argument, think of another action by a totalitarian state that matches Rummel's argument. And then explain one historical example of a democratic state committing mass violence that would challenge Rummel's argument regarding democracies on mass violence. Let's take a look at Rudolf Rummel, a United States political scientist, death by government in 1994. His argument: the more power a government has, the more it can act arbitrarily according to the whims and desires of the elite, the rich and powerful, and the more it will make war and others and murder its foreign and domestic subjects. The more constrained the power of governments, the more power is diffused and checked and balanced, and the less it will aggress on others and commit mass violence. At the extremes of power, totalitarian governments, what do? Slaughter their people by the tens of millions. In contrast, democratic governments, what do? They can barely bring themselves to execute even serial murders. So what's his argument? Totalitarian governments cause mass violence. Democratic governments do not. Now let's take a look at the questions again. Identify one historical example of mass violence committed by a totalitarian state in the 20th century that would support Rummel's argument. Okay? You can think of Japan. You can think of the Soviet Union. You can think of Nazi Germany. Use them as examples. Explain one historical example by a democratic state that committed mass violence that would challenge Rummel's argument regarding democracies and violence. Did Great Britain or France or the United States, major democratic powers, did they use mass violence? Because Rummel says that they would not. Take 5 minutes, answer these questions, pause this video, and when you're done, we're going to take a look at some examples, possible examples and commentary. Here's where your answers would go. Okay, welcome back. I see that you've unpaused the video. So we're going to take a look at one historical example of mass violence committed by a totalitarian state that supports Rudolf Rommel's argument that totalitarian governments frequently use mass violence. And one example can be the Nazi Holocaust. It's an example of mass violence committed by the totalitarian state. Okay? All right. Another example you could have used is in Russia, and you could have used the effects of Stalin's 5-year plan, collectivization in the Ukraine, mass violence utilized to collectivize the private property, and the famine that occurred because of it. Millions of people died. In Japan, you can use the Banten Death March of U.S. prisoners of war and political opponents. Okay? And you have your example for Nazi Germany. So what's an example of a democratic state that actually used mass violence, which refutes or goes against Rommel's argument that they would never do that? The use of the atomic bomb by the United States of America in Japan during World War II challenges the author's argument that democracies would not commit acts of mass violence, because the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing were deliberate use of mass violence designed to break the will of the Japanese population, killing over 100,000 people, most of whom were civilians. What do you need to remember from this section? Well, new military technology and new tactics, including the atomic bomb, firebombing, and the waging of total war, led to increased levels of wartime casualties. And World War II officially ended after the United States of America, dropped 2 atomic bombs, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, forcing Japan to surrender. Okay? Always focus on how claims or evidence support, modify, or refute a source's argument. Thanks for watching. We hope this helps.